Are you ready? And you're listening to On the Record with Tiffany. The reason why we started this show is to bring awareness to the disparities in healthcare and the inequities in healthcare, and to also highlight social injustice. But at the same time, we wanted to show the hope that working with purpose can bring. And by doing that, I like to highlight sheroes. And today I have one of my favorite sheroes here. And what a shero is somebody who is out working with purpose, bringing change to our community, and adding to the public narrative in a positive way. So my shero today is Miss Deborah Omowale, the executive director of SACAM. Deborah, can you
Hi,
tell
Tiffany.
our friends a little bit about you? Hey, Deborah.
Sure. SACAM is the San Antonio African American Community Archive and Museum. And what is important about our mission and why I'm even there is we are in a community where African Americans do not seem as visible in other communities. This is not Baltimore, Detroit, or Atlanta.
Right.
It is San Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to make sure that the cultural heritage of African Americans is collected, preserved, and shared. And how that fits with just me personally is it's my personal mission to leave a legacy of love and service to my family and my community. And with my love of history and just marrying that with the mission of SACAM, it's just perfect.
It really is a perfect combination. Just knowing you, I know that it's a perfect combination. Deborah, can you tell our audience a little bit about why history is important for San Antonio? Because we played a big part in the civil rights movement of the 60s.
Yes. So one of the things, I'm going to take it back to the Republic of Texas. So I'm going to start way back there
Oh, take us on back, Deborah.
and mention that the reason why Texas was in a war with Mexico to begin with
Mm-hmm.
was because Texans wanted slaves. And the Mexican government said, no, 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 no. Slavery doesn't work for us. So that is actually what the Battle of the Alamo was about. Uh,
Wow.
but when you go and visit uh, the Alamo, you hear all of the stuff about Santa Anna, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't hear that. You also don't hear the story, and people now will say it's an urban legend, but the story behind the Yellow Rose of Texas. But I don't want to get people all in a bunch, their panties in a bunch, about talking about that. But certainly, you can go to our website and find out more information about how African Americans actually had a pivotal role in the Republic of Texas, fighting in the Battle of Goliad, fighting at the Alamo, um, and then we can bring it all the way to civil rights. But even before that, this was the home of the Buffalo Soldiers,
Mm-hmm. We have a long legacy
a very long
of
legacy.
activism
Hmm.
coming from this city on both the black and the brown side,
Absolutely.
and a long history of activism as a uniting figures
Hmm.
within our state and nation, which I don't think people realize. Like the points that you just made, I didn't realize it, and I read constantly, as you know,
Hmm.
and
Yes.
so if an avid reader doesn't know, what do you think about the average person?
Exactly. History is his story. And if I'm telling my story in a uh, patriarch patriarchal society, then my story is going to end up looking like I am the knight in shining armor. So
Right.
that's why it's so important for everyone's story to be told so that you can get a true reflection of history. And that's even with the women's suffrage movement, which is what you we're talking about today.
Yes.
A
Hmm.
lot of people don't even know the importance that African American women played in the suffrage movement.
Please tell us about that.
So, one of my sheroes is actually Ida B. Wells Barnett. And she was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi. And then she moved to Tennessee. She was a teacher and she also went to school at Fisk University. Uh, she was, well, her dad was a slave
Hmm.
who was emancipated. And on her way to Nashville, she took a seat in the train in the ladies section of the coach. And they told her she couldn't sit there. And she said, "Excuse me, I'm a lady." And they said, "No, you're black first." And she actually fought, ended up biting the conductor's hand,
Oh my gosh.
which I think is just when you okay. So this is 1884. All right, this is when this happened. So she just was so far ahead of her time, and she actually sued the train company, and she won.
Oh my
But
goodness.
it was overturned, of
Hmm.
course, because they kept it going to higher courts, and so she ended up losing. But she decided at that point to start a paper in Memphis. It was called the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight. Uh, after so in that, I'm going to get to the suffrage movement in a minute, but you will read if you look at if you look at copies of her work, she was a um, advocate against anti-lynching
Hmm.
in Tennessee, and actually she put herself in the limelight where she could have easily been
Hmm.
lynched. Well, she got married. I'm sorry, she moved to Chicago and then she married an attorney. So you will also see her as Ida B. Wells hyphen Barnett. And her husband owned a newspaper, the Chicago Conservator. And that's when she got involved in the suffrage movement. So in March of 1913, she traveled to the first suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. And on that day, she took about 60 African American women with her. So she was not playing. I just love
Wow.
her. She's not going alone. So she gets there, and oh my gosh, they ask her if her and her delegation would march in the back so the Southern delegates wouldn't be upset. And
Oh.
she argued. She said, either I go with you or I'm not going at all.
Hmm.
And they kept going back and forth. And so she left. But when the march started, guess where she was? And the delegation of women that she took.
At the front.
She was right there with the Illinois delegation. And
That's right.
and so Belle Squires and Virginia Brooks,
Hmm.
um, they were like, oh my gosh, this woman has to be a part of this movement. So actually, in June of 1913, her work helped pass the presidential and municipal bill in Illinois, allowing women that were over the age of 21 the right to vote in presidential and municipal elections. However, they weren't eligible to vote in state elections yet. But again, like I said, a lot of people just don't know that she fought through the amendment in 1920. So she's just one shero. We're talking about sheroes because I am
Wow.
not. She's just one shero that I would like to highlight in the suffrage movement. And again, if you look at photos and things of early suffrage movement pioneers, you don't see African American women. There is another one, and I should have looked up
But
her
we were
name.
there. We were there throughout it.
Absolutely,
An
we
integral
were
part.
there.
Deborah, I want you to hold your
Oh,
next
sorry.
thought because
Okay.
we have to stop and pay some bills, but we have more great show for our listeners. You all stay tuned and keep listening because Deborah Omowale is going to come back and talk with us a little bit more about women's suffrage and about her story and how she came to get involved with and committed to the city of San Antonio. And you've been listening to On the Record with Tiffany.